Assalamu alaikum and a very warm welcome to the show. You're watching Let's Talk. My name is Anwar Mia and today we have a very special program for you indeed. We're talking about the changes in the legal aid system. We're talking about the cuts that have taken place in a very dynamic situation that's here in the legal arena. And we're also going to be focusing on what effect this has, if any, on the youths, specifically within our community. To discuss this with me today, I have three very distinguished guests for you who've taken their valuable time out to join you here today. Ladies and gentlemen, to my extreme right is George Campanella. Now, he's a senior solicitor advocate at the higher courts in the United Kingdom. He works for a firm, or is an associate at EBR Attridge. Now, this is the leading and the biggest criminal franchised firm in the whole country. And we're very delighted to have George with us today. George, welcome to the show.
Hello, very good evening to you.
Thank you. And to my extreme left is Mr. Mahtab Aziz, not an unknown face. He's been with us before. He's a solicitor at Whitworth Green & Co. And it's an absolute pleasure to have you back here today, Mahtab. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And to my immediate left is a very distinguished and senior barrister from a top law chambers in the United Kingdom, Red Lion Chambers. And I should also say that he was also a councillor for the Labour Party as well. So he's going to be bringing a very interesting and very unique dimension to this particular programme. And we're absolutely delighted that David could join us today. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as usual, this is an interactive show. If you have been affected by the changes in the legal aid system, if you have previously had experience with the legal aid system, or if you know anyone who has been affected in any which way whatsoever, or perhaps you have children or relatives who are youths and have been through the court experience and you would like to share those experiences with us today, or in fact if you wish to pose any questions to our distinguished guests, then do call the number at the bottom of your screens. We would be delighted to hear from you. Allow me to ask each of our distinguished guests to tell us a little bit about what they do and what sort of experiences they have faced following on from the changes which have been made by the government. Perhaps I should just start with George. Tell us a little bit about yourself, please, and if you can then focus on your experiences with the legal aid system.
Well, I'm a criminal defence solicitor. I qualified in 1997 and I only practice criminal law. And over the years I worked for various firms. I currently work for EBR Attridge Solicitors, and most of our work is legally aided work. So obviously we rely on a good reputation. We obviously rely on payment from the Legal Aid Authority, and we just do a mixture of crime. We do general crime, we do serious crime, we do offences which concern fraud, serious fraud. So across the board we do a lot of general crime, but mostly we focus on high-end crime, trivial allegations to very serious allegations.
Now, in terms of the way the legal aid system works, is it means tested? Is it dependent upon the nature of the offence? In a nutshell, please, if you would kindly describe it for our viewers.
I can explain the procedure. For a person to be eligible for legal aid, you have to meet certain criteria. There are two tests. The first test is obviously it's got to be in the interest of justice that somebody receives legal aid. The case, in order to satisfy the interest of justice, it's got to be a serious case. For example, it can attract a custodial sentence. If it's a trivial matter which doesn't necessarily attract a custodial sentence, there may be difficulties getting legal aid, although it's not unheard of. Some cases do attract legal aid, particularly where it's going to affect a person's liberty. The other test is the means testing, which recently has undertaken a great change. So you've got to receive a particular type of income. There's a cut-off in relation to receiving legal aid in the Magistrates' Court. Recently in the Crown Courts, if you receive an income in excess of £37,000, you're not eligible for legal aid, and unfortunately you've got to fund your own way.
And that can be very expensive at times, with a lot at stake, obviously.
Well, it can be expensive. There was a time when individuals could recover their costs, but the problem now is if you're going to recover costs, it's going to be on legal aid rates only. So you could end up losing a lot of money.
George, thank you very much. We will come back to you in a moment. Just before I come to David, because David's going to not only talk about the legal aid system, but hopefully his experiences in the communities as well. Because, of course, as I said earlier on, he was a counsellor, and I suspect he had a lot of people who he had discussions with about the kind of things that are going on in the field. But perhaps I could bring in Madhab Bhai at this stage, and if you could kindly tell us a bit about the kind of work you do and how it relates to legal aid and your experiences, perhaps.
Yeah, the majority of my work is actually like George, to do with the criminal legal aid system. I go to court at the magistrates level and the youth court, but I don't go to the Crown Court because I don't have or I haven't applied for higher rights. So I deal, most of my cases I deal with the youth court and the magistrates court. And a lot of my work is actually referred to me. I'm not a duty solicitor. People may have heard of this this type of solicitor called a duty solicitor. Duty solicitor is a person who gets called upon by a police station if there's a client that needs representation. And it's up to you whether you want to be a duty or not. I've been practicing for like over 20 years, but I've never been a duty solicitor because I'm quite lucky in the sense that I get a lot of cases referred, mostly in sort of ethnic communities of like Asian, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Indian, Somalian, wide variety, Turkish. And so that's the sort of work I've been dealing with. But I have noticed that due to the changes that have happened, it's really affecting, I think, the results that you're able to achieve. Because what I've noticed is that lawyers, perhaps in George's category, in my category, we're used to working in a certain way, which we sort of perfected over the years. A lot of the newer entrants in the profession, I have to say sadly that they don't have that sort of attention to detail or willingness to go that extra mile. And as a result of that, I've seen, because I get a lot of cases coming to me from other firms where people are dissatisfied. And I sort of looked at the file and I noticed that, look, in this particular case, this chap shouldn't have pleaded guilty. He had a proper defence. So what I've noticed, there's more of that happening now, unfortunately.
Thank you, Madhab Bhai. Now, David, you're obviously a very senior barrister and used to head your own chambers as well. So I suspect when you do your work, you're doing it at the higher level. And I wonder what experiences you have, or if you've been affected, for example, by the legal aid cuts, and how that's affected your clients as well, your lay clients.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing I should say is that I work very closely with solicitors like George and Mataba, and I was called to bar in 1998, and I chose to work in publicly funded areas. So I work within the fields of human rights, crime, prison law, public law sort of areas, and it was always important for me, from being from a working class background, to work in publicly funded areas, particularly for people who couldn't afford to have their own representation. So the cuts that George was talking about so eloquently a few moments ago, they are really devastating our communities. We've seen the changes already and the changes to come. In terms of working on a higher level, I can say now, having been instructed by George in the past, that we work on the same level. There's a slightly different emphasis to what we do. George is a High Courts advocate in his own right, but George is obviously also a solicitor, and I'm a specialist advocate, and so my role pretty much is on that front pew in the courtroom or working alongside Queen's Counsel in presenting a case before a court or before a tribunal, what those particular problems are. But the partnership with my colleagues in the solicitors profession is an equal partnership. The cuts are devastating. Those high street solicitors firms up and down the community, which your viewers know very well and are part of the community, and they're exactly the sort of firms who contact me if they need that specific sort of advocacy help, specialist advocacy help on their cases. And for me, once those firms go, once that link with the community goes, who really is there to represent your viewers and other people throughout our community? And I mean, this is the issue that I think that my colleagues here and myself are really here to talk about today. Who is there on the front line? The government are talking about a public defender service, and it's talking before about the way that my colleagues work. We know that they work a 37-hour week, and I've worked with George on different cases, and I've had emails, I can say this on air, at all times of sort of night and day, where George saying, hey, I've spotted this within the papers, this particular problem. What do you think about this way? How are we going to deal with this? And I just can't see that happening.
So basically, the lay clients get a proper, real, service at the point of delivery, whereas under these sorts of cuts, and this may be absent. I will come back to you in a moment, David. I think we've got a caller waiting. Perhaps we can take the call and then see what they have to say. Hello, caller. Hello, assalamu alaikum, caller. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Yes, you're speaking live on air.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
Yes, I'd like to say. Hello.
Yes, hello. We can hear you. Perhaps if you could turn the volume of your television down, please.
Yeah, I'd like to say that I'm a community worker.
Right.
And there are lots of domestic violence victims, women especially.
Right.
They are suffering because they can't have justice anymore. I have a close contact with a few solicitors. I used to take people. Now they are turning us down. And there are people and children, women suffering for that. Because especially in particular community, when the violence happens, they don't call police, they don't go to the GP, and they haven't got enough evidence that the victim there suffers in silence. And when it is really bad, then they come to us for help.
How important is it for the people that you work with to have good representation from people who are properly funded in order to be able to make their or protect their interests? How important is it?
It's very, very, very important because the people are suffering.
Right. Well, thank you very much for your call, and it's very important work that you do. Let's see who else is online. Hello, caller. Hello, assalamu alaikum. Hello, I think you are there. Hello.
Assalamu alaikum.
Jay, welcome salam. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, brother. I wanted to ask a question to your panel.
Yes, please go ahead.
Brother, I work in the social housing sector, and I wanted to ask the panel whether they would agree that the legal community are responsible for the cuts in the legal aid budget due to the abuse that it has been suffering for many years.
Do you have any particular examples of evidence of this sort of abuse?
The example I can give you is the abuse that the funds have been suffering through disrepair, housing disrepair cases.
Right. Is there any particular example that you can flag up to say that there's been any proof that there's been any abuse of the legal aid system?
Yeah. You have legal firms all over London taking out advising, chasing housing association and council tenants to take out injury claims.
Right. Is it what the government relies on? Is that what the government relies on when they put forward their argument to justify the cuts in legal aid? Are the government saying that the reason that they are cutting legal aid is because there is abuse or widespread abuse of the system? Is that what they're saying?
No, but that's kind of irrelevant, isn't it?
Well, no, it's not, because the government have a reason why they're cutting legal aid, and if that is to do with any sort of abuse which has been proven, then that would be relevant. But if it's not to do with any abuse which has been proven, then surely the allegation of abuse being responsible for the cuts is precisely that, an allegation.
No, the question is to your panels. I just want to ask the question.
Okay, well, thank you.
They're in the profession. They must know. I mean, I can give you names.
Okay, no, we'd rather not.
On air, I don't want to name somebody, but I can give you legal firms. I've personally been involved in dealing with housing disrepairs.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you for your call, and thank you for raising that particular point. Perhaps if I start with George, if I could ask you, the second caller says that the responsibility for the cuts in legal aid lies squarely at the feet of the solicitors because of abuse. Do you have a response to that?
Well, I just want to make it clear to the caller that I've never dealt with housing myself, and I'm a criminal defence specialist. And obviously, with respect to the caller, and I understand what he's saying to a certain extent, with respect to the caller, I just want to deal with issues concerning cuts in criminal law. But for the caller, I can touch on this. My understanding is in relation to housing generally, there's very limited funding for that. There are a few community supported organisations that can deal with it, but it's extremely limited. And with respect to the caller, I understand precisely what the caller is saying in relation to firms being responsible, but I think we're talking about things that happened a long time ago. As a rule of thumb, there are restrictions on legal aid insofar as housing is concerned, but I can't accept that it's solicitors or barristers alone that are responsible for that. The reason why there are cuts in legal aid now is because of the general culture insofar as austerity is concerned. You know, it's austerity that's causing the problem. I'm not saying in any shape or form that the cuts to legal aid, particularly criminal legal aid, or even family legal aid, are justified. The statistics just do not tally, and unfortunately, housing is in that pool, as it were. It was a long time ago when solicitors could practice housing law, but it's extremely difficult now. As I say, it's normally very limited community organisations that can do it, but they just offer general advice on the subject. But insofar as any general litigation is concerned, my understanding is that there's no legal aid available.
George, thank you very much. If I can bring Mahtab in very briefly. As a solicitor, what do you say in response to the caller who suggests that the solicitors are responsible for the legal aid cuts because they have abused the system in the past?
Right. If I could just clarify a couple of points. Housing disrepair comes under civil legal aid. There's two types. There's civil legal aid and there's criminal legal aid. Civil legal aid, some time ago, was operated on a very different sort of system, and there was abuse, I have to admit, not by obviously firms that I've been with, but I've read about the types of abuse that have happened, and perhaps it did go some years ago, but as George rightly pointed out, everything's been cut now, and the scope for abuse is much more limited.
But can you, do you recognise a causal link between any historical abuse and the cuts that are taking place now? Or is it, as George was saying, austerity, which is the operative word
here? A lot of the previous abuse was more to do with areas like immigration, civil housing disrepair, and possibly family. But as far as criminal legal aid is concerned, it's widely recognised that it's probably...
I must stop you there. We're about to go into a break, but just before we do, perhaps if we could see if we can squeeze in a final caller and address the answer when we come back. Hello, caller.
Hi there.
Yes, hello. Thank you for waiting. What would you like to say?
Okay, assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Wa alaikum salam.
Okay, I've got one question. If somebody has been charged, pleaded guilty,
right,
and because of the barristers and the other party has agreed on a term that he would get a lesser sentence and put somebody on the line saying, oh, plead guilty and then we'll give you a lesser of sentence. He's been sentenced for 3 years, and I think it's a bit too harsh. Is it possible to appeal under legal aid?
Well, we'll come back to that. Thank you for your question. We will try and address that when we come back. I'm being told that we can take another call very briefly before we go on to our break. Hello, caller. Please reduce the volume on your television screen. Hello, caller.
Hello, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Hello. You're live on air.
Yes. Can you hear me? My name's Rabia from Birmingham.
Hello, Rabia from Birmingham. Thank you for calling. What would you like to say?
Okay. Youth, in particular, I just don't think it's legal aid that have let them down. I think the whole system has let the youth of this generation down. I'll give you an example. I have a son who's 14.
Right.
In my area, there's no activities for him to go to. If I was to ring the resource centre up, if I was to ring the library up, the minimum time they can stay out is for like 6:30. The library is open till. After that, my child is to the house. If not, he's on the street. He's bound to fall into some trouble, and then the legal aid kicks in, and even that's been cut off. And then when he turns 18, 19, you have council tax, rent. I mean, they are just merged into adulthood. They still need the support of their family. Their home that their parents have brought and raised them when they were young isn't their home anymore. They have to pay rent, council tax, and everything. They might not even have a job. And if they don't have a job, they are unemployed. And I think to myself, the whole system is letting the youth down. They have certain rules for certain policies and different rules for different policies. I just think that the youth will one day say that this is it, we've had enough.
So you think that...
Because in my opinion,
yeah.
Prevention is better than cure.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you...
And then put in the implements that we're going to cut out legal aid, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, because we've already put in a program for preventing all these crimes from happening.
Rabia, thank you very much for your call. You put it to a more socio-cultural sphere, and something that we will discuss later on. We must go on to a short break. Ladies and gentlemen, when we come back, we will put these questions to our panel, and of course we will hope to take some calls from you as well, and we will carry on our discussions on this topic. Do stay with us. We will be back very shortly.